So there may be something that your failures are actually trying to tell you about yourself. I've been thinking about this concept of failure lately. And I guess as you get older and as you go through life and as you have expectations, your sense of failure and success and happiness may start to come into question a lot more. And I know for me, I've just been exploring a lot of things. And one of the concepts was failure, right? What does it look like? Is it actual failure in life or is it transitions? Okay, I was recently thinking about a few different moments, hiccups for me in life. And I was just like, man, what's actually going on? Right? What am I not doing properly? And my initial association was that, okay, in some way, shape, or form, I am probably failing or I am not doing something right. Versus looking at, I might be in a transitional phase. There are a lot of things I have in plan for myself. And there may be so many things in life that you have a plan for. Some you are actively working at right now. Sometimes while we are working, we forget that what work actually implies is that there needs to be things that need to be sorted out. We may need to get rid of other things in the process, or this may not be our thing altogether. I always say the funny thing about doubt and also fear, and even failures, they all can show you what's actually important to you and what's worth fighting for. Ask yourself, am I failing at my own life or am I failing to live up to somebody else's expectations of me? Am I failing to be someone else that I hold myself in comparison to? Am I genuinely failing overall, or is this an idea that I have about myself and where I should be? But if I was to look at the bigger picture, which I have recently, I realize I'm doing everything I need to be doing. And certain things take time. Even when it comes to relationships, if it feels like certain relationships have failed after you have tried, maybe it needs to fail so you can be more successful. And I'm not saying to be lazy in your relationships. I'm not even necessarily saying immediately give up. However, sometimes we put so much into a relationship, into a connection, and it gets us nowhere. Why we feel like it's a failure because it's like, well, what do I have to show for it? Versus understanding that sometimes this relationship was not going to be a part of my success to begin with. And everything that I do desire is on the other side of it. That's why so many people speak about standards more than they adhere to them, because standards are very uncomfortable, right? Standards are requirements, right? Standards have to be maintained and sustained. It is one thing to talk about all the standards that you have for other people, but it's another thing to actually be able to consistently show up for your own. And that's not always easy, okay? But when you have certain standards, your relationships and the things that you desire out of life will inevitably start to shift. And in process, you will also feel like you're failing. The reason why is because there's so much that might be happening around you, so much that's being deconstructed, so much of you being out of your comfort zone that you think, well, I'm losing all these things, so there must be something wrong. There must be something that I'm doing wrong. Versus looking at your day to day. What am I trying to create for myself? What life am I trying to build? What does it look like? What does it consist of? Did I actually include all these components that are falling away from me? Okay? Or does it need these things to happen so it can exist? I can promise you, sometimes your failure is not you failing at all. It's just you failing to continue things that are no longer suitable for you. And if you can understand that, and if you can also accept it in some way, shape, or form, then you might recognize I'm further along than what I thought. You might have some level of poor self esteem. Okay, you might have certain demands that are truly unrealistic. You might even be setting yourself up for failure. Okay, when we talk about a self fulfilling prophecy or even self sabotage, we may not always realize how we create an environment that we are most used to. Okay, sometimes your failures may also indicate how much you actually love and value yourself. Because how many times am I failing at the same thing? And how disappointed am I getting with myself? How resentful am I becoming of myself? There's so much information in failure than just this thing of I didn't accomplish. Because sometimes if you take a look at your successes, you might not even put much weight into them because you're already on to the next thing. I want to ask you, When it comes to this concept of failure, what are you fearful of? Who are you fearful of disappointing and letting down? Some people might say themselves, but I don't think that's true. Dig a little bit deeper. Who holds a certain level of demands or expectations or requirements or a standard over you that you feel like is always out of reach? You may realize that you don't fail as often as you think that you do. And if you feel like you're a failure, I want you to ask yourself why. What things point to you being a failure in life? Okay. And once you have those figured out, I want you to think about if a person, somebody that you were close to, had these same experiences and they thought these same things about their accolades or whatever it is that you may be struggling with, would you consider them a failure? Sometimes this concept of failure is very skewed. And what it does is it keeps us functioning, but it doesn't really allow us to grow in the ways that we need to. Like I said, for myself, there were so many things that have been happening and, my routine changing in certain ways. And I felt like, man, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Overlooking, hey, are you more tired lately than you have been? Have there been a lot of bits and pieces that have been moving and transitioning for you? Actually, yeah. Okay. Actually, there's been a lot changing for me. Sometimes when you are trying to do so many out of the ordinary things, or you are trying to have a life that is yours versus a life that is for somebody else, remember it takes you deviating from what's comfortable and what's familiar. And every time you have a disappointment or a seemingly setback, maybe you are not failing at all. Maybe it's not a setback at all. Okay? Maybe it's actually information and trial and error for you to actually build and sustain what you want properly, because you will always learn something. I think sometimes our failure is telling us, hey, you keep failing to treat yourself properly. The biggest failure you might have in life is the fact that you don't see yourself as somebody who's valuable without constantly having to do something to earn it. That's probably your biggest failure, if you really think about it. I want you to start thinking about what failure is to me, and in what ways do I feel like I've failed recently? And write it on a piece of paper. Take a look at it. And ask yourself, how true is this? Look at these things. Are they failures, or are they actually moments of you figuring something out? And maybe your expectations don't actually align with the time and work it takes to make certain things happen. Sometimes your failures is just information in terms of what it is that you were working at improving. And even when it comes to certain relationships failing, sometimes they need to fail for you to have more successful connections, or for you to successfully start to take care of yourself. Take care of yourselves. Truly take inventory in terms of what you think about yourself and why. And more than anything, take flight.